My name is Martha Hale, 52, mother of 2, and I've always believed a family dinner could fix almost anything. That night, I learned how wrong I was. The house smelled like roasted chicken and rosemary. The autumn air outside was cold enough to make the windows fog, and the golden light above our oak table felt like a small sun keeping us together. I remember humming as I spooned mashed potatoes onto my daughter's plate. Layla didn't look up. "You haven't touched your food," I said, trying to sound gentle, but she just stared at the wall, her fork frozen halfway to her mouth. Richard, my husband, gave me a tired smile from across the table. "Long day, huh?" he asked her. Then, all at once, Layla slammed her palm down so hard the salt shaker jumped. The sound cracked through the room like thunder. "Enough, Mom, just stop. Why can't you leave me alone for one meal?" For a second, I thought she was joking, but her eyes, wet and burning, told me she meant every word. The silence that followed felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. My son Noah's hand trembled around his glass. Richard froze, his lips parting but no words coming out. I could feel my heart beating against my ribs, slow and heavy, like it didn't know what to do next. "Layla," I whispered. But she cut me off again. "Just go. No one wants you here." The words hit harder than the slam itself. I felt the chair scrape the floor as I stood, my body moving before my mind could catch up. I wanted to speak, to defend myself, to demand an explanation, but my voice wouldn't come. So I did the only thing I could. I stepped away from the table. My hands were shaking, and I could taste salt, not from the food, but from tears I didn't even realize had fallen. Behind me, the clink of silverware stopped. Richard rose slowly, his chair legs groaning against the floorboards. "If she's not welcome here," he said quietly, "then neither am I." And that was the moment I knew this wasn't just about dinner. Something inside our family had cracked wide open. I didn't move at first. The air around the table felt heavy, like the moment after lightning when you can still taste the metal in the air. My heart was still thudding in my ears, trying to catch up to what had just happened. Layla's chair screeched against the hardwood as she stormed down the hall. Her footsteps hit the stairs, sharp, quick, angry. Then a door slammed upstairs, shaking the frame of the chandelier just above the table. The house went quiet again. Even the ticking of the kitchen clock seemed too loud. Richard's eyes were still fixed on the hallway. Noah stared at his plate, a smear of mashed potatoes drying at the edge of his fork. I took a slow breath, my throat raw. "I didn't mean to." "I know," Richard said softly. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. His palm was warm, grounding. "She's just tired." "From what?" I whispered. "She barely talks to us anymore. She skips dinners, comes home late. Now this?" He looked at me the way people do when they want to say something but aren't sure it will help. "Let's just give her space tonight. I'll go check on her later." I nodded, though every part of me wanted to go upstairs right that second. But mothers know, when your child builds a wall that high, you can't climb it right away. You wait. You sit with the ache. Noah cleared his throat. "Mom, can I be excused?" His voice trembled, and when I looked at him, his eyes were glassy, scared. He was only 16, caught in the middle of something he couldn't name. "Go ahead, sweetheart," I said, brushing his shoulder as he got up. He lingered for a second, then hurried upstairs too. The silence that followed was worse than the shouting. I started clearing the plates just to have something to do. The smell of the chicken turned sour in the air, as if the whole room had spoiled in a matter of minutes. I scraped food into the trash, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Richard stood behind me, leaning on the counter. "You should sit down." "I'm fine." You're not. He stepped closer and wrapped his arms around me. I wanted to sink into that hug, but the question in my chest wouldn't let me. What did I do wrong? I whispered into his shoulder. I didn't yell. I didn't even. It's not you, he said. Something's eating her up inside. I wanted to believe that. I really did. But later that night, when Richard had gone upstairs and the house had settled, I sat in the dark kitchen staring at the window. Outside, the yard lights flickered, catching the last few leaves trembling on the maple tree. That's when I saw the envelope on the table. It wasn't there before. White, slightly crumpled, with the college logo stamped in the corner. Layla's name printed neatly across it. I picked it up, hesitating. I shouldn't open it. I knew that. But something inside told me this was the crack we hadn't seen forming. The letter was short, cold, a warning from the university, academic probation, scholarship at risk. My stomach dropped. I could almost hear the click of every puzzle piece sliding into place, the late nights, the silence, the anger. I pressed the paper flat with trembling hands, guilt clawing at my throat. How long had she been carrying this alone? When I heard Richard's footsteps on the stairs, I slid the letter back exactly where I'd found it. He stopped at the doorway. You're still up? Couldn't sleep, I said, forcing a small smile. He poured himself a glass of water, took a sip, then leaned against the counter. You'll talk to her tomorrow? If she'll listen. She will. I wanted to believe him, but the words felt like smoke in my mouth, thin, disappearing. That night, I lay awake listening to the house breathe. I could hear the faint hum of Layla's music through the ceiling, soft and broken, like she'd turned it down halfway through crying. I wanted to go upstairs and hold her, tell her that bad grades and mistakes don't define a person, but I didn't know if she'd even let me touch her anymore. When morning came, the smell of coffee filled the kitchen. I sat at the table, tracing the grain of the wood with my finger. The spot where she'd slammed her hand still showed a faint mark, a bruise in the polish. Layla came downstairs quietly. No yelling, no eye contact. Her hair was tied back, her eyes swollen. She reached for a slice of toast and stood at the counter, chewing without looking up. Morning, I said softly. She nodded but said nothing. Richard walked in, kissed my temple, and poured coffee into 2 mugs. Then he looked at Layla. You going to class today? Yeah. You sure? Yeah. She grabbed her bag and turned to leave. Before she could open the door, Richard's voice stopped her. Layla. She froze. He didn't raise his tone, but there was something steady, almost unshakable in it. If your mother isn't welcome at this table, he said, then neither am I. Her hand tightened on the doorknob. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then, without looking back, she walked out. The door clicked shut behind her. Richard exhaled, slow and heavy. She'll come around. I wanted to believe him again, but as I looked at that empty chair across from me, the one that used to be hers, I realized belief wasn't enough anymore. Something inside our family had cracked, and if we didn't face it soon, it would break completely. The house felt like a stranger's the next few days. Layla slipped in and out quietly, always late, always tired. Her door stayed closed, her footsteps light but hurried, as if she didn't want anyone to know she was home. At dinner, only 3 plates sat on the table. The chair across from me, hers, remained empty, the napkin still folded, untouched. Noah tried to fill the silence with small talk about school, but even his words felt too loud against the quiet. Richard kept saying, "She just needs time." But every hour of that silence felt like losing another piece of her. One night, I stood outside her room, a tray in my hands, tea, toast, and that honey she liked when she was little. I almost knocked, but something stopped me. I heard faint music through the door, the kind people play when they're trying not to cry. So I set the tray down quietly and walked away, downstairs. The house hummed in the dark. I sat by the window with a book open but unread, watching the yard lights flicker. The garden was a blur of gray shadows, the wind pushing the branches against the fence. When Richard came down, he found me still there. "You haven't gone to bed?" he asked. "I can't." He rubbed my shoulder. "You can't fix everything tonight. Martha." "I know." I looked out at the rain starting to fall. "But she's my daughter. I don't even recognize her anymore." He didn't answer. He just stood there with me until the rain grew heavy enough to drown out our words. The next morning, I wrote her a note. "I love you. I'll be in the garden if you want to talk." Then I went outside and started pulling weeds that didn't need pulling, just to keep my hands busy. The dirt was cold. The rain had turned it soft, and soon my gloves were soaked. But the garden was quiet. No questions, no shouting, just the steady sound of my breath and the wind. When I finally looked up, Layla was standing on the porch. She held the note in one hand and that same crumpled envelope from the college in the other. My heart kicked. She didn't speak at first. The wind tugged at her hair, and her sweatshirt clung to her shoulders where the rain had caught her. Then she stepped down, one slow step at a time, until she stood in front of me. "I saw you found it," she said, her voice shaking. I nodded. "I didn't mean to pry. It was just... there." Her eyes filled again. "I'm drowning." "Mom." It came out like a confession, raw and heavy. "I thought I could handle everything. School, work, keeping my grades up, pretending I was fine. But I'm not fine. I'm exhausted." She dropped the envelope into the mud and pressed both hands to her face. I reached out, not sure if she'd let me touch her. But when I did, she didn't pull away. "I thought you'd be disappointed," she whispered. "I didn't want to see that look." "Sweetheart," I said softly, "I'd rather see you broken than gone." Her shoulders shook. I pulled her into my arms, rain soaking through both our clothes. For the first time in weeks, she let herself cry like she used to when she scraped her knee, messy, helpless, real. I stroked her hair, whispering, "It's okay, it's okay. We'll figure it out." But even in that moment, something inside me knew I had to be careful. Love couldn't mean letting her say things that tore us apart. When she finally pulled back, I brushed her cheek with my thumb. "I'll always love you," I said, "but yelling like that can't happen again. We talk, not tear." She nodded through tears. "I'm sorry, Mom. I really am." "I know." We stood there for a long time, the garden turning to mud beneath our shoes. The storm had eased into drizzle, but my heart was still pounding, this time not from fear, but from hope. She bent to pick up the letter, wiped the mud from it, and sighed. "They said if I don't raise my GPA this semester, I'll lose the scholarship. We'll find a way," I said. "Maybe fewer work hours, more rest. You can't run on empty forever." Her lips twitched into a small, tired smile. "You sound like Dad." "Good," I said. "He's usually right." We both laughed, a soft, shaky laugh that felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. When we went back inside, Richard was in the kitchen reading the paper. He looked up, surprised to see us together, wet and muddy. "Everything okay?" he asked carefully. Layla nodded, her eyes red but calm. "Not perfect, but better." He smiled, folding the paper. "That's a start." We ate reheated leftovers that night, and for the first time in a while, the silence didn't hurt. It just felt quiet, healing. As we cleared the dishes, Layla touched my hand. "Thanks for waiting," she said. I squeezed her fingers. Always. When she went upstairs later, I found her note still on the counter. She'd written something beneath my message in her handwriting, small but sure. "I'll be in the garden, too." I smiled, folded it carefully, and slipped it into my pocket. Outside. The rain had stopped completely. The garden was still, the air clean and sweet. I stood by the window for a while, breathing it in, realizing storms don't just break things, they water what's been too dry for too long. The next morning felt different. The house didn't hum with tension the way it used to. The air was lighter, quieter, almost cautious, as if even the walls were waiting to see what would happen next. I was making coffee when Layla came downstairs, her hair still damp from the shower. She gave me a small, uncertain smile. It wasn't the kind that fixed everything, but it was enough to make my heart unclench a little. "Morning," I said, handing her a mug. "Morning," she echoed, her voice soft. "I'm sorry about last night." I shook my head. "We already started fixing it, remember? Out there in the rain." Her lips lifted into something that almost looked like relief. She took a sip, winced, it was too hot, and laughed quietly. That laugh hit me like sunlight. I hadn't heard it in weeks. Later that day, I found her in the living room with a stack of notebooks spread across the coffee table. She looked up as I passed. "Do you know where Dad keeps the calculator? I need to check something for my budget." "It's in the drawer," I said, pointing toward the desk. "You working on your schedule?" She nodded. "I dropped one of my shifts at the cafe. It means less money, but maybe I can actually sleep now." "That sounds like a good trade." She smiled faintly. "I think so too." That evening, Richard came home earlier than usual, his tie loosened, hair messy from the wind. "What smells so good?" he asked, setting his briefcase by the door. "Layla's helping with dinner," I said. His brows rose. "Is this real life?" "Don't ruin it," I warned, smiling. Layla rolled her eyes. "I'm not that bad." Richard laughed and came over to stir the sauce. For a while, the kitchen filled with the kind of easy noise I'd missed. The clatter of pans, soft teasing, the radio humming an old Fleetwood Mac song in the background. Even Noah joined in, setting the table and pretending to complain about being the unpaid waiter. It felt almost like before, but better, because now I knew how fragile it all could be. When we sat down to eat, Richard raised his glass of water. "To second chances," he said. Layla grinned. "And to Mom's patience. Seriously, you deserve an award." I laughed, though my throat tightened a little. "I'll settle for quiet dinners." "Deal," she said. Halfway through the meal, Layla put her fork down and looked at us. "You know what? We should start something new." Richard tilted his head. "Like what?" "Every dinner," she said slowly. "We say one thing we're grateful for, just one. No rules." Noah groaned. "Do I have to?" "Yes," we both said at once, and everyone laughed. Layla smiled and looked around the table. "I'll start. I'm grateful that you didn't give up on me." Her eyes found mine. "Either of you." The words landed so gently, so honestly. I felt them all the way down to my bones. Richard nodded. "Your turn." "Martha." I thought for a second, glancing at each of them, the man who'd stood beside me when the house felt like it might split in two, the daughter who'd found her way back through a storm, and the boy who'd kept quiet when silence was the hardest thing of all. "I'm grateful," I said, "that we can still sit at this table together." The clink of forks and glasses felt softer after that, like the house itself had taken a breath it didn't realize it was holding. After dinner, Layla insisted on doing the dishes. I stood by the sink, drying plates while she scrubbed. The rhythm of it, the running water, the sound of soap bubbles popping, felt comforting, like a song I hadn't heard in years. "You know," she said, not looking up, "I used to think you'd be disappointed if I failed." "Why would you think that?" "Because you always seemed so steady, like nothing ever shook you." I laughed softly. "That's the biggest lie mothers tell by accident." She smiled. "Yeah, well, I'm glad you're not as perfect as I thought." "Good," I said, bumping her shoulder. "Perfect's boring." Richard walked in just then, towel slung over his shoulder. "You two look like a Hallmark commercial." Layla threw a sponge at him. He caught it midair, laughing. The sound filled the whole kitchen, spilling down the hall, and standing there, watching them, I realized something simple, but true. Healing doesn't happen in one big moment. It sneaks up quietly, in burnt sauce, shared laughter, the way someone says thank you without words. That night, before bed, I found a note on the fridge in Layla's handwriting, "Dinner tomorrow, my turn to cook," underneath in smaller letters. She'd written, "Don't worry, no table slamming." I laughed out loud, folded the note, and stuck it in the drawer with the others I'd kept over the years, crayon drawings, Mother's Day cards, scraps of teenage apologies. As I turned off the kitchen light, I glanced back at the table, the same table that had once held so much anger. Now, it just looked peaceful, ready for whatever came next. A year later, our table looked different. Not because it was new, same wood, same scratches, but because of what it held now. Laughter, stories, the sound of forks tapping in rhythm with joy instead of anger. We'd kept our little tradition. Every night, before eating, someone would say one thing they were grateful for. Some nights it was something big, like I passed my class. Other times, it was small. The dog didn't eat my homework, or the coffee machine actually worked today. It became our quiet ritual, a promise disguised as a game. No matter what happened, we'd show up, share a meal, and say something that reminded us we still had each other. Layla kept her scholarship. She didn't make perfect grades, but she learned to ask for help, to rest when she needed to. Noah graduated high school that spring, taller than me, with that same quiet kindness his father carried, and Richard, steady as ever, kept teaching, still leaving his shoes by the door no matter how many times I told him not to. As for me, I learned something too. That being a mother isn't about keeping everyone together all the time. It's about holding the space long enough for them to come back when they're ready. One evening, after dinner, the kids were clearing the table. The sun was setting, painting the kitchen gold. Layla looked up and smiled. "Your turn, Mom. What are you grateful for today?" I thought for a moment, tracing the faint mark on the table where her hand had slammed down a year ago. It was still there, a tiny dent, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. "I'm grateful for second chances," I said. "And for this table." Layla raised an eyebrow. "The table?" "Yes," I said, smiling, "because it's proof that even when we break a little, we can still hold together." Richard reached over and squeezed my hand. Noah groaned playfully. "Here we go. Mom's going to make us cry again." "Good," I said. "Means you're still listening." The room filled with laughter, soft and familiar. Outside, the last light faded, and the first stars began to show. When I turned off the kitchen light that night, I paused at the doorway, looking back at that old oak table. It had seen shouting, tears, apologies, and forgiveness. But more than anything, it had seen us, flawed, stubborn, and still trying. Love isn't about never breaking. It's about staying long enough to rebuild, And sometimes, all it takes to start again is a meal, a moment, and a single word of gratitude.